Does no other profession occur to you, Nickleby, which a young man of your figure and address could take up easily and see the world to advantage in?
No, Mr. Cromwells, sighed Nicholas, shaking his head.
Why, then I'll tell you one. The stage! The stage? Cried Nicholas. The theatrical profession. I am in the theatrical profession myself. My wife is in the theatrical profession. My children are in the theatrical profession. I had a dog, lived and died in it from a puppy. Say but the word, and I'll bring you out. I want a novelty.
Charles Dickens once wrote that the more real the man, the more genuine the actor. That may or may not be so. It's an open question. Certainly he was writing of himself, though, and he declared, "I was an actor and a speaker from a baby." His father, John Dickens, used to take him to the public house, set him up upon a table where he would sing and dance to the wonder of the assembly. He did impersonations of various local eccentrics. He was an irrepressible entertainer, an infant phenomenon. "I must have been a horrible little nuisance," he said. At the drop of a hat he would recite from his favourite poem, "'Tis the voice of the sluggard, I hear him complain, you have waked me too soon, I must slumber again." He had a toy theatre, too, in which he played with characters penny plain and twopence coloured. Some say he was playing with them for the rest of his life. In Chatham, in Kent, where he grew up, he was remembered as an active, alert, eager, odd child. Hysterical, perhaps, oversensitive, certainly, but decidedly odd. I looked at nothing that I know of, but I saw everything. And now I see the outside of our house, with the latticed bedroom windows standing open to let in the sweet-smelling air. We are playing in the winter twilight, dancing about the parlour. When my mother's out of breath and rests herself in an elbow chair, I watch her winding her bright curls round her fingers and straightening her waist. And nobody knows better than I do. She likes to look so well, and is proud of being so pretty. "My dear boy," cries my mother, caressing me. "My own dear little boy." These idyllic childhood days were without any doubt the happiest days of Charles Dickens's entire life. And suddenly he was snatched away from all that happiness. His father, who worked in an office of the Admiralty, was transferred to London, and at the age of 10, Charles Dickens was on his way to the city which changed him forever. London. But not Victorian London, much less modern London, a more intimate, a more compact, a more colourful city, a city of street criers and strolling pedlars, of cockfights and public hangings, of pleasure gardens, and of small, unlicensed theatres. There was no uniformity or system to it whatever, so it encouraged eccentricity and oddity of every kind. It would in time become the city of Dickens's vision, of his imagination. But for the 10-year-old boy, there seemed nothing ahead for him at all. His father was spending quite recklessly, and his mother's attempts to found a school, Mrs. Dickens's establishment, she grandly called it, founded when she failed to enroll a single student. The family's fortunes were in rapid decline. They'd moved into a small house in Camden Town, the view of dingy poverty, his purpose in life making himself useful, polishing his father's boots. Education gone. Company none. Happy and secure life gone forever. The idyll and innocence of childhood disappeared altogether. I fell into a state of dire neglect, which I have never been able to look back upon without a kind of agony. His father was getting further and further into debt, and they were subject to constant humiliations. The child remembered everything.
"Oi! You ain't out yet, you know. Pay us, will ya? Don't hide, you know, that's mean. I wouldn't be mean if I was you."
But they did hide. They kept moving from house to house. And then, just 2 days after his 12th birthday, Charles Dickens was set to work in a blacking warehouse beside the Thames. It's no exaggeration whatever to say that his childhood died in that dismal place. It was a crazy, tumble-down old house, abutting, of course, on the river, and literally overrun with rats. Its wainscoted rooms and its rotten floors and staircase, with the old grey rats swarming down in the cellars, and the sound of their squeaking and scuffling coming up the stairs at all times. And the dirt and decay of the place rise up visibly before me, as if I were there again. The blacking was for shoes. His job was to cover the pots of paste blacking, first with a piece of oil paper and then with a piece of blue paper, to tie them round with a string and then to clip the paper close and neat all around. When he'd finished a few gross of these, he was to paste on each a printed label. He worked a 10-hour day, with 1 meal break at 12 and a tea break in the late afternoon. A few days after he'd entered the blacking warehouse, his father John, insolvent, ruined, was confined within the Marshalsea prison for debtors. When my father said, "The sun has set on my life forever," I really believe that these words had broken my heart. Dickens took those same words and wove them into the fabric of his art when he directly introduced them into his novel David Copperfield. Were they the expression of his father, John Dickens, or of his invented character, Mr. Micawber? Who can tell? Perhaps there's no difference. On the first Sunday after he was taken to the prison, I was to go and see Mr. Micawber and have dinner with him there. He was waiting for me within the gate, and we went up to his room, top story but one, and cried very much. Then, after many tears, he told me this: "Annual income, £20, Copperfield. Expenditure, £19, 19 shillings and sixpence. Result, happiness. Annual income, £20, expenditure, £20, 0.06. Result, misery. The blossom is blighted, the leaf is withered, the god of day goes down on the dreary scene, and, well, in short, you're forever flawed, as I am." After which he borrowed a shilling of me for porter, gave me a written order on Mrs. Micawber for the amount, and put away his pocket-handkerchief and cheered up. Not so easy for the 12-year-old Charles Dickens to cheer up. There was even worse to come for him, fiercely proud as he was, even at that early age. The blacking factory moved to a main thoroughfare in Covent Garden, and he had to sit and work in a window, where he could be stared at by those who chose to stare at him. His mother and brothers and sisters, by now 5 in number, joined John Dickens in the Marshalsea, but the 12-year-old Charles was placed in a lodging beside the prison. I kept a small loaf and a quarter of a pound of cheese on a particular shelf of a particular cupboard to make myself supper when I came back at night. No advice, no counsel, no encouragement, no consolation, no support from anyone that I can call to mind. So help me God. Each night, returning through the darkened streets from the blacking factory, he was filled with anxiety and terror. But he said nothing about it at the time. Not to anyone. He laid it within his breast, where it grew and grew into a vision of the world. At the time, he just did his work. And to his little working companions he told stories, or lies, rather, about his childhood and about his family. In fact, Dickens never really stopped lying all his life. It was the source and secret of his existence, just as it would become the salvation of his art. I knew I was common, and I wished I was not common. And the lies came out of that somehow.
"Let me see you play cards with this boy," said Miss Havisham.
"With this boy?" said Estella with disdain. "Why, he's a common labouring boy. He calls knaves jacks, does this boy. And what coarse hands he has! And what thick boots!" I had never thought of being ashamed of my hands before, but I began to consider them a most indifferent pair. Her contempt for me was so strong that it became infectious, and I caught it. He was a common boy in a commonplace world. I was such a child and so little that frequently when I went into the bar of a strange public house for a glass of ale or porter to moisten what I'd had for dinner, they were afraid to give it to me. I remember one hot evening I went into a public house and said to the landlord, "What is your very best ale? A glass." For it was a special occasion. I don't know what it may have been my 13th birthday.
"Twopence halfpenny," said the landlord, "is the price of the genuine stunning ale."
"Then," says I, giving him the money, "just draw me a glass of the genuine stunning, if you please, with a good head to it." The landlord looked at me over the bar from head to foot, with a strange smile on his face. His wife came out from behind with her work in her hand and joined him in surveying me. They served me with the ale, though I suspect it was not the genuine stunning, and the landlord's wife, opening the little half-door of the bar and bending down, gave me my money back, and gave me a kiss that was half admiring and half compassionate. At night the boy read his old books, reading as if for life, as he said. Tom Jones, Peregrine Pickle, Roderick Random, Don Quixote, Robinson Crusoe. They all kept me company. They kept alive my fancy and hope of something beyond that time and place. There were times, though, when he simply could not bear it. He doubted whether he could ever be clean again. One day in the blacking factory he fell into a fit, which lasted all afternoon. But then, as if he were a child in a fairy tale, or a novel of his own making, the horrors of Charles Dickens's early years were suddenly and abruptly lifted. His father came into an inheritance and left the Marshalsea. Then he took his son out of the blacking factory. Home for good and all. Home for ever and ever. He was sent to school along the Hampstead Road. The school was not a very good one, but he wasn't there for very long. At the age of 15 he became a lawyer's clerk, and he plunged himself into London life. His knowledge of London was wonderful, said his employer, for he could describe the position of every shop in any of the West End streets. A colleague recalled that Dickens could imitate, in a manner that I've never heard equalled, the low population of the streets of London in all their varieties. He was still that irrepressible entertainer, you see. What he really wanted most of all at this early time was to be an actor, to go on the stage. All his life he loved the company and the conversation of players. He always attended the latest productions, but more than that, he acted, directed, managed, and wrote plays all his life. At the height of his fame, one of the stagehands confided in him, "We in the profession, Mr. Dickens, always thought it was a crying shame when you took up writing books." As for his clothes, they were loud and vividly coloured, almost theatrical, one might say, and those who encountered him in public places noted that he tended to strike up dramatic attitudes. It was almost as if he didn't know the difference between the stage and the street. But, of course, the street was his stage. It was his theatre. He walked the city incessantly. He didn't talk to many people, but he observed them all. And then, at about the age of 17, he started to write it down. He misses nothing. At Seven Dials, for instance, in Covent Garden, he sees a little crowd which is collected round a couple of old ladies who, having imbibed the contents of various bottles of gin and bitters in the course of the morning, have at length differed on some point of domestic arrangement, and are on the eve of settling the quarrel satisfactorily by an appeal to blows.
"Why don't you punch her, Sarah?"
exclaims one half-dressed matron by way of encouragement.
"Why don't you? What's the matter? Inquires another old woman who's just bustled up to the spot. Matter? Matter? Here's poor dear Mrs. Sullivan has 5 blessed children of her own, can't go out a-charing for one afternoon, but what hussies must be a-coming and enticing away her own husband, as she'd been married to 12 year come next Easter Monday, for I seen the certificate when I was a-drinking a cup of tea with her, only last Wednesday. Mrs. Sullivan, I says, promiscuously. Mrs. Sullivan, what you mean by hussies? Interrupted champion of the other party, who has evinced a strong inclination throughout to get up a branch fight on her own account. What you mean by hussies? Never you mind, replies the opposition expressively. Never mind. You go home, and when you're quite sober, mend your stockings. He knew from the start, you see, that there was something greater within himself, beyond all the high-spirited mimicry and the ventriloquial gifts. He started writing feverishly. He wrote stories, he wrote essays, he wrote sketches. I could write anything. At the age of 23, he was approached by a publisher, William Hall, who asked him if he'd care to write a series of sketches upon the adventures of some Cockney sportsmen. This was still the period, you see, in which Londoners travelled to rural areas in order to make fools of themselves. He set to work immediately, but he needed a name. He always needed a name before he could begin. Then he remembered the coaches along the Bath to London Road. The name of the proprietor, emblazoned in bright yellow letters on a maroon background, was Moses Pickwick. That was it. Pickwick. The Pickwick Papers. Heads! Heads! Take care of your heads! Cried the loquacious stranger, Jingle by name, as the coach came out under the low archway which in those days formed the entrance to the coach yard. Terrible place, dangerous. Other day, 5 children, mother, tall lady, eating sandwiches, forgot the arch, crash, knock. Children look round, mother's head off, sandwich in hand, no mouth to put it in. Head of a family off. Shocking, shocking. Sportsman, sir, he said, abruptly turning to Mr. Winkle. A little, sir, replied that gentleman. Fine pursuit, sir, fine pursuit. Dogs, sir? Not just now, said Mr. Winkle. Ah, you should keep dogs. Fine animals, sagacious creatures. Dog of my own once, yes. Pointer. Surprising instincts. Out shooting one day. Entering enclosure. Dog stopped. Whistled. Whistled again. No go. Stock still. Called him. Ponto! Ponto! Wouldn't move. Dog transfixed. Staring at a board. Looked up. Saw inscription. Gamekeeper has orders to shoot all dogs found in this enclosure. Wouldn't pass it. Wonderful dog. Valuable dog, that. Very. Singular circumstance, that, said Mr. Pickwick. Will you allow me to make a note of it? Silence in court, announced the entrance of the judge. It was most particularly short, and so fat he seemed all face and waistcoat. He rolled in on his 2 little turned legs, and having bobbed to the bar, who bobbed to him, and put his little legs underneath his table, and his little 3-cornered hat upon it. Call Nathaniel Winkle. Here, sir. And now, sir, when you let his lordship and the jury know what your name is, will you? Winkle. Have you any Christian name, sir? Nathaniel, sir. Daniel. Any other name? Nathaniel. Sir, my lord. I mean... Nathaniel Daniel? Or Daniel Nathaniel? No, my lord. Not Daniel at all, just Nathaniel. What did you tell me your name was Daniel for then, sir? I didn't, my lord. Yes, you did, sir. How could I have got Daniel on my notes unless you told me so, sir? Mr. Winkle has a very short memory, your lordship. Call Samuel Weller. What's your name, sir? Samuel Weller. my lord.
How do you spell that, with a V or a W?
Well, that depends on the taste and fancy of the speller, my lord. I never had occasion to spell it more than once or twice in my life, but I spells it with a wee.
Could we continue with the cross-examination, if you please?
Of course, my lord. Mr. Weller, you were in the passage, and yet you saw nothing of what was going forwards. Have you a pair of eyes, Mr. Weller?
Oh, yes, I have got a pair of eyes, and that's just it. If I was a pair of patent double-million magnifying gas microscopes of extra power, perhaps I might be able to see through 2 flights of stairs and a deal door. But being only eyes, you see, my vision's limited.
The Pickwickians made the whole world laugh. Within a year, the complete novel was published in France, in Germany, in Italy, in America, in Australia. It even made its way as far as Russia. In the Pickwick Papers, Dickens created a vision of the world. He did it by bringing to life a tradition of Englishness which had never previously been captured. It was quite a new thing, and modern novels serialised in monthly parts, so that the readers were almost literally hanging on to the end of each episode. It began with a sale of 4,000 copies per month, and in the end was selling 40,000. There were Pickwick hats, Pickwick coats, Pickwick cigars. Led by the young Charles Dickens, Samuel Pickwick and the Pickwickians joined the immortals. He was 25 years old, and his fame was known all over the world. It was all before me. I was so overcharged with delight and with gusto and with anticipation and oh dear, I almost forgot to mention my wife. He had married Catherine Hogarth just after completing the first instalment of the Pickwick Papers. He'd met her, in a sense, professionally. She was the daughter of an editor for whom the young Dickens had composed a series of urban sketches. The marriage was, you might say, the next piece of business. Please note that Charles Dickens's relationships with females were always decidedly odd. He was either in a mad and hopeless passion with them, frantic and desolate in turn, or he placed them on an impossibly high pedestal, or he was entirely matter-of-fact, not to say brusque, with them. Was he not good enough for them? Or were they not good enough for him? The question was always unresolved. Catherine was 20 when they married. A pretty little woman, plump and fresh-coloured, a genial, smiling sort of a countenance, very sweet-natured. He loved her ardently, passionately. Now, Catherine had a younger sister, Mary, 16 at the time of the marriage, and Dickens was almost equally attached to her. When the newlywed couple moved into what Dickens called a frightfully first-class family mansion with awful responsibilities in Doughty Street in Holborn, Mary moved in with them too, and a very happy little family they were, the 3 of them. Then, one evening, not more than a year after the marriage, in the spring of 1837, they went, the 3 of them, Charles and Catherine and Mary, to see a farce which Dickens had written. It was called Is She His Wife? On their return to Doughty Street, later that night, Mary retired to her room, but before she could undress herself, she gave a piercing cry and collapsed. She died of heart failure the following day, 17 years old. Thank God, Dickens wrote, that she died in my arms. And the very last words she whispered were of me. He cut off a lock of her hair and kept it in a special case. He took a ring from her finger and placed it on one of his own. This ring he wore for the rest of his life. He gathered her clothes and put them in a particular cupboard. 2 years later he was still taking them out and looking at them. He expressed the wish eventually to be buried beside her. On her tombstone he wrote, young, beautiful, and good. And for the rest of his life, he said, ever after, He was pursued by a vague, unhappy loss or want of something.
After the briefest respite for his grief, he flung himself back into his work. Yes, work! We must close up the ranks and move on. Who is hit? Nelson called out when one of his captains was shot on deck. We are all hit, one way or another. We are all hurt in action. Yet it must be fought out like all the rest of life. The battle of life, one of Dickens's favourite phrases. In his next novel, Oliver Twist, Dickens strikes for the first time in his own work the note of primal terror, of a child's helplessness in the adult world. With a slice of bread in his hand and the little brown cloth parish cap on his head, Oliver was then led away from the wretched home where one kind word or look had never lighted the gloom of his infant years. And yet he burst into an agony of childish grief as the cottage gate closed after him. Wretched as were the little companions in misery he was leaving behind, they were the only friends he had ever known. And a sense of his loneliness in the great wide world sank into the child's heart for the first time. "No, sir, no!" sobbed Oliver, clinging to Mr. Bumble's hand. "No, sir, no! I will be good. Indeed, indeed, indeed I will, sir. I am a very little boy, sir, and it is so So, what? So lonely, sir. So very lonely. Now, this is the extraordinary thing. Dickens was writing Oliver Twist and the Pickwick Papers at exactly the same time. Comedy and melodrama, farce and sentiment side by side. He called it streaky bacon. This is what really delighted him, within the bounds of one book, even one chapter, to go from a scene of sorrow and suffering to one of wild humour and grotesque high spirits. His energy in life was prodigious, almost frightening. Light and motion flashed from every part of him. Those who knew him described the quickness, keenness and practical power, the eager, restless, energetic outlook on each several feature. Mrs. Carlyle said that it was as if his face was made of steel. Leigh Hunt observed that it has the life and soul in it of 50 human beings. He was all contradictions and contrasts, nothing grey or middling. With strangers he was as merry and bright as you like, but with his own family he was reserved and taciturn. With sad or shy or ailing people he was the kindest, most sympathetic creature on the face of the earth, but with his friends he was impatient and domineering. He could be bubbling over with laughter one moment, and then just a second later his eyes would flash like danger lamps. He loved the children in his books, but he did not seem to love his own children as they grew older. He worshipped food and drink in his fiction, but in life he ate little and drank less. Some say he was only truly happy when he was alone in his study, writing. But he wasn't alone. His characters surrounded him in crowds. They talked to him, he said, and they touched him. In truth, what happened is that he became them. He spoke their words out loud. As he was writing, he would go to the mirror and put on their faces just as he put on their voices. "Look here, Nickleby, what do you think of this poster? First appearance of the unrivalled Miss Petowker of the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane." "Dear me, I know that lady, Mr. Cromwells." "Then you are acquainted, Nickleby, with as much talent as was ever compressed into one young person's body. It is talent of a certain sort."
Do come over to the sofa, Mrs. Wititterly. You don't look yourself at all. I'm always ill after Shakespeare. I scarcely exist the next day. I find the reaction so very great after a tragedy, my lord. And then Shakespeare is such a delicious creature. What is the first class, Mr. Squeers?
The first class, Nickleby, is the English spelling and philosophy class. Where's the first boy? Where is he? Where's that boy? Where's the first boy?
Please, Mr. Squeers, sir. He's cleaning the back parlour window.
So he is, to be sure. So he is. We go upon the practical method of teaching here, Nickleby. C-L-E-A-N. Clean. Verb, active, to make bright. To scour. W-I-N, win. D-E-R-D. Winder. A casement. When boy knows this out of book, he goes and does it. And where's the second boy? Where is he? Where's that boy? Where's the second boy?
Please, sir, he's out weeding the garden.
Quite right, so he is. B-O-T, bot, T-I-N, tin, N-E-Y, ni. Botany. Noun, substantive, a knowledge of plants. When a boy's learned that botany means a knowledge of plants, he goes and weeds them. That's our system, Nickleby.
Nicholas Nickleby, as funny and theatrical a novel as any ever written, also changed the face of English education. Dickens's satire upon the school run by Wackford Squeers, Dotheboys Hall, led to the immediate closure of private schools in Yorkshire and elsewhere. In a similar spirit of outrage, Dickens had satirised the new poor laws in Oliver Twist. The newspapers had denounced him for his radical fervour. He was making a difference. He loved it. What a thing it is to have power. But of course his power wasn't political power, nor even social power. It was power of the imagination, which is why he was able to convince his readers of the truth, the essential truth of his most extravagant visions. It's been said of Dickens that when the fire of one of his novels was threatening to grow dim, he would throw on a child to stoke up the flames. His children do have a most peculiar habit of dying, but this was no literary or romantic device. Dickens burned with them and felt all the agonies of the fire. After Nicholas Nickleby, he was writing The Old Curiosity Shop, and of course little Nell had to die in the end. Yet she left him forlorn and miserable. All night I've been pursued by that child. I'm breaking my heart over this story. I'm slowly murdering the poor child. Yet it must be. All next week I shall be lain up with a broken heart. But I think it has come famously. Bring out your pocket handkerchiefs. She was dead. No sleep so beautiful and calm, so free from trace of pain, so fair to look on. She seemed a creature fresh from the hand of God and waiting for the breath of life, not one that had lived and suffered death. Her couch was dressed with here and there some winter berries and green leaves gathered in a spot she had been used to favour. When I die, put near me something that has loved the light and had the sky above it always. Those were her words. Now she was dead. Dear, gentle, patient, noble Nell was dead. Her little bird, a poor slight thing the pressure of a finger could have crushed, was stirring nimbly in its cage. And the strong heart of its child mistress was mute and motionless forever. But the death caused a sensation. The stern jurist, Lord Jeffreys, was found in tears after reading the scene, and Dickens's close friend, the great actor Macready, was literally prostrate with grief. The Irish patriot Daniel O'Connell threw the periodical in which it was written out of the window of his railway carriage, exclaiming, "He should not have killed her!" At a slightly later date, Oscar Wilde was less affected. It would take a heart of stone to read the death of little Nell without laughing. Now, all this while, Catherine Dickens had been creating a few children of her own, 4 in quick order and more to follow. They'd moved to a bigger house off the Marylebone Road, which Dickens said resembled nothing so much as a hospital ward, what with Walter crying and Katie snuffling and Charles Jr. sickening for something mysterious. He'd already sent his parents into exile, having set them up in a little cottage in Devon, but they had a way of turning up in small matters like the father forging the son's name to guarantee certain debts. How he raged against them! He wanted to get away from them all. He had dreams of extensive travelling. He was haunted by visions of America. He wanted to encounter a country as young and energetic as he was, and the Americans wanted to see him too. A few months before, they had gathered in the harbour of Boston, shouting to newly arrived passengers, "Is little Nell dead?" Now they were asking, "Is Charles Dickens alive? And is he really here?" He was followed by crowds wherever he went. He was given dinners and parties and receptions. He made speeches. He entertained 1,000 guests. And finally he met the President of the United States, who declared he had not expected to meet so young a man, sir. But he did not meet with unmitigated approval. Far from it. He was attacked by the newspapers for his colourful clothes, flashy, his assertion of copyright, smells of the sharp rank, and for his mind, which according to the New York Herald was coarse, vulgar, impudent, and superficial. Now, Dickens was not accustomed to public criticism. He left the country in a state of great rage, taking his savage revenge on those same papers as only he could, in the pages of Martin Chuzzlewit, a book which, on its first appearance, was burnt publicly in the streets of New York. "Here's this morning's New York sewer. Here's this morning's New York stabber. Here's the New York keyhole reporter." So opens Martin's journey to America. When Dickens returned from the United States, his appetite for travel had not yet been satisfied, so he whisked the whole family off on a grand European journey which lasted a full year. From Naples, Dickens witnessed Mount Vesuvius in a state of eruption, its dark smoke hanging in the clear, bright skies. So what did he do? He climbed up it, of course, at once, that very night. He was warned of the dangers of ascending a volcano in a state of eruption, but he insisted it had to be done. He had to look into its smoking mouth. With only one guide accompanying him, he climbed the last few hundred feet as burning cinders and ash rained down upon them. Finally he reached the brink, where, triumphantly, I looked down into the flaming bowels of the earth. Then I came back again, alight in 6 places, burning from head to foot. This is pure Dickens. The wild Dickens blazing away just as he blazed away at his novels. I'm working myself into such a heat that I shall burst out prodigiously. Always onwards and upwards, climbing towards the fire. Mount Dickens. Eruptions at regular intervals, and not just in his work either. His fire was increasingly turned against what he perceived to be the scandals and enormities of his own time. He was becoming the writer who spoke for an entire age. He was made editor of a great new national newspaper, the Daily News. He was chairing committees. He was making speeches on prisons, on the slums. He'd just begun a series of Christmas books, which had a triumphant beginning with A Christmas Carol, the book in which he conjures up the thin phantoms of 2 miserable and ragged children, ignorance and want. This little story of Scrooge and Bob Cratchit and Tiny Tim took as much mastery over Dickens as it had over everybody else. He was somehow possessed by this story of redemption, of a man forced to face the truth about himself and change.
became a kind of modern fairy tale, and its effect was overwhelming. One employer, on reading the book, gave his employees an extra day's holiday. When Thomas Carlyle finished it, he went out and ordered himself a turkey. The spirit of Christmas, as newly defined by Charles Dickens, was everywhere. How, at this triumphant moment in his career, did Charles Dickens think of himself? Well, the secret is that he didn't think of himself at all. He was not in the least bit interested in self-communing, nor did he wish to dwell upon the sources of his art. Writing of Shakespeare, he said, "It is a great comfort to my way of thinking that so little is known about the poet. It is a fine mystery, and I tremble every day lest something should come out." Though Dickens could only approach himself by becoming one of his own characters, by transforming himself into a fiction, which was why he was planning another novel, one in which he would tell his own story. First, though, as always, he had to find a name. He always had to have a name. Welbury, Magbury, Topflower, Copperboy, Copperstone, Copperfield, Copperfield. This is Charles Dickens here, and this is David Copperfield here. They're staring at one another, face to face. Which one do you think will blink first? This book, of all his novels, his favourite, cost Dickens very dear. His friends had been concerned for him. Even while he was writing it, he'd often been giddy and nauseous. His left leg trembled beneath him, and he could not stop his hands and his arms from shaking. He felt a pain in his left side, the same pain he'd suffered as a child in the blacking factory. He suffered, too, from extreme depression of mind and a disposition to shed tears from morning to night. As to repose, for some men there is no such thing in this life. Idleness wearies me more than labour. To do nothing is exhausting. How strange it is to be never at rest, never satisfied. Sir Dickens was not only David Copperfield, he was Steerforth too. Steerforth with his handsome head thrown back and the sea wind playing on his face as he calls out, "Ride on over all obstacles and win the race! The race one has started in! Ride on!" The journey, Dickens said, is ever upward, and we must pursue it, or we are worthy of no place here. He was still climbing up that mountain, but he rarely looked back at those who were obliged to travel with him. Catherine Dickens, after 10 years of childbearing, became very unwell, with spells of giddiness and violent headaches. She suffered, in general, from living in the immediate vicinity of Charles Dickens. In the spring of 1851, his father, John Dickens, that irrepressible reprobate, died after a terrible operation upon his bladder without anaesthetic, in which the room was turned, in his son's words, into a slaughterhouse of blood. Only 2 weeks later, his youngest daughter, Dora, died, also quite suddenly. At the time, he was addressing the annual dinner of the General Theatrical Fund, expressing his gratitude towards those actors whom he so admired. Not just because the actor sometimes comes from scenes of affliction and misfortune, even from death itself, to play his part before us. All men must do that violence to their feelings, in passing on to the fulfilment of their duties in the great strife and fight of life. When the speech came to an end, he was taken to one side and told the terrible news. All that night he sat by the bedside of his dead infant. But then, just like those actors he was praising, he returned to the strife and fight of life. "I am quite confident I should rust, break down, and die if I spared myself. Much better to die doing."
And what was he doing?
But he was directing and playing in a comedy by his friend Lord Bulwer-Lytton. It was called Not So Bad As We Seem. Oh, Bulwer-Lytton's wife said, Mr. Dickens makes a habit of acting with a dead father in one pocket and a dead baby in the other. And ever by day and night Dickens wrote, under the sun and under the stars, move all we restless travellers through the pilgrimage of life. It's somewhere, he said, somewhere in all these travels, there was a still small voice crying out within him, crying out, help!
London, Michaelmas term lately over, and the Lord High Chancellor sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall. Implacable November weather. As much mud in the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the face of the earth, and it would not be wonderful to meet a megalosaurus, 40 foot long or so, waddling like an elephantine lizard, up Holborn Hill. Smoke lowering down from chimney pots, making a soft black drizzle with flakes of soot in it, as big as full-grown snowflakes gone into mourning, one might imagine, for the death of the sun. Fog everywhere. Fog up the river, where it flows among green meadows. Fog on the Essex marshes. Fog on the Kentish heights. And hard by Temple Bar, in Lincoln's Inn Hall, at the very heart of the fog, sits the Lord High Chancellor in his High Court of Chancery. Never can there come fog too thick. Never can there come mud and mire too deep for this High Court of Chancery, most pestilent of hoary sinners, this day in the sight of heaven and earth. Dickens believed himself, at the age of 45, to be growing old. There are people saying quite loudly that he's finally burnt himself out, that David Copperfield was his last flare. When Little Dorrit appeared, it was dismissed as twaddle. In some ways, the spirit of the age was in all its high Victorian seriousness against him. Dickens was often dismissed as a mere entertainer, a writer whose reputation would not last as long as the century. So here he is, in middle age, with his achievements apparently behind him, and what was ahead of him? Oh, only an increasingly loveless marriage and a large, ever-expectant family. And please remember, too, the great poignant note of his life, that vague, unhappy loss or want of something which has pursued him since the early death of his sister-in-law. Where again will he ever be able to find someone young, beautiful, and good? He felt that his life was slowly closing down. My blankness is inconceivable, indescribable. My misery, amazing. As a child, Dickens had wandered the London streets of crumbling, straggling houses with its dirty men and filthy women and squalid children. That I suffered in secret and that I suffered exquisitely, no one ever knew but I. And when in later life he suffered exquisitely, terribly, he wandered once more among the dirty streets. He had to return to the cold, stony-hearted stepmother of his suffering, London. He started to walk through the city at dead of night. He'd always walked it during the day, but now he was for the dark. Now the night enters his head. He becomes the child again, experiencing the horror of London.
he visits the prisons, the madhouses, the workhouses.
Suddenly, a thing that in a moment I should have trod upon without seeing rose up at my feet with a cry of loneliness and houselessness, the like of which I never heard. We then stood face to face, looking at one another, frightened by one another. The creature was a beetle-browed, hare-lipped youth of 20, and it had a loose bundle of rags on, which it held together with one of its hands. It shivered from head to foot, and its teeth chattered. And as it stared at me, persecutor, devil, ghost, whatever it thought me, it made with its whining mouth as if it was snapping at me like a worried dog. Intending to give this ugly object money, I put out my hand to stay it, for it recoiled as it whined and snapped, and laid my hand upon its shoulder. Instantly it twisted out of its garment, like the young man in the New Testament, and left me standing there, with its rags in my hand. What could he do? How could he help? As ever, he flung himself into his work. I'm in a regular ferocious excitement. I get up at 7 in the morning, have a cold bath before breakfast, and blaze away, wrathful and red-hot. My eyes have grown immensely large, my hair is very lank, and the head inside the hair is hot and giddy. He attacks a grotesque legal system and a bad, incompetent government, a blundering civil service and a hypocritical clergy. He attacks the employers and the unions, teachers and philanthropists. In fact, the whole nation and society of England were under siege. I must deliver a sledgehammer blow. I'm in desperate earnest. And why should I not be in earnest when I am fighting the world? A man who could do nothing by halves, Dickens's friend Wilkie Collins said of him, appears to me to be a fearful man. He knew it. He knew it well enough of himself. He knew his imagination was desperately strange, and that he himself was sometimes accused of being mad. Mad people were strangely attracted to Dickens, and sent him letters. One gentleman, distracted by the death of his son, remarking upon the peculiar contortions of the body, declared, there's a point for Mr. Dickens. In his novels, he loved to impersonate those on the very edge of sanity. We may call them eccentric or insane, but the effects are pretty much the same. Phoebus! How goes the world? I tell you what, I shouldn't wish it to be mentioned, but it's a mad world, boy. Mad as bedlam. You been to school? Do you recollect the date when King Charles I had his head cut off? The book said it happened in the year 1649, but I don't see how that can be, because if it was so long ago, how could the people about him have made that mistake of putting some of the trouble out of his head when it was taken off into mine? There are others who say that Dickens was possessed by female voices, and that he loathed as much as he loved his mother, his sisters, his wife, and out of that crushing imbalance came all the farce and the fury. Certainly he treated his old and widowed mother as a comic character from one of his books. My mother has a strong objection to being considered in the least old, and usually appears here on Christmas Day in a juvenile cap, which takes an immense time in putting on. The instant she recognised me, she plucked up her spirits and asked for £1. Of his wife, he wrote, in equally scathing terms, I find that the skeleton in my closet is becoming a pretty big one. It seemed that he could never escape his unhappiness. And then, as it had before in his past more than once, his life changed irrevocably. At the age of 46, Dickens met a young professional actress who had a small part in The Frozen Deep, an Arctic melodrama which he had written in collaboration with Wilkie Collins. Needless to say, he also played the principal part in it, he directed it, he built the scenery. The young actress was called Ellen Ternan. She was 18 years old
and Dickens fell deeply in love with her. Well, no, that's altogether too familiar a phrase. All the desperate intensity of his nature, all the emptiness and all the yearning found their focus in Ellen Ternan. She was the one thing missing from his life. For her, it must have been like walking through fire. Dickens followed her and her family on a theatrical tour around the country. He could not rest or think or write or sleep without the image of that young woman being always before him. And under the pressure of this devastating feeling, he came to a terrible decision. The woman with whom he lived had become insupportable to him. She was ailing, she was clumsy, she was tearful, she was not witty. She was not Ellen. She was growing old. He resented the memories she evoked in him. He was frightened of growing old with her. So what did he do? He behaved exactly as if he were a character in one of his own novels. He gave instructions that the marital bedroom should be divided into two, and he had a brick wall erected between himself and his wife. Then, in the spring of 1858, after 22 years of marriage, Charles Dickens asked his wife for a formal separation without giving the slightest reason whatever. She went back to live with her family. But her younger sister, Georgina, stayed behind and supported Dickens. With Catherine gone, Georgina took charge of the illustrious novelist's household. It was an ugly and a messy business, rendered infinitely worse by Dickens's disturbed and disturbing behaviour. Nothing could surpass the misery, the unhappiness of our home. Well, rumours, of course, began to spread that Dickens was having an affair with a young actress, or much worse from his point of view, that he was having an affair with his own sister-in-law, and Dickens, quite simply, lost control. He had a letter printed in the Times in which he condemned misrepresentations most grossly false, most monstrous and most cruel. Slanders passing over the country like unwholesome air. But not one in 1,000 readers of the newspaper had the remotest idea what he was talking about. Now, of course, they did. Many other newspapers felt free to publicise the separation and to turn against Dickens in the process. He'd visited upon himself the very fate that he most feared. He shunned many of his oldest friends on the mere suspicion that they had expressed sympathy for his estranged wife, and he was, of course, in turn shunned by them. He changed his publishers because they had not printed his statement in their periodical, Punch. He broke down and wept at a lunch at the Athenaeum. He felt harassed and haunted on all sides. He now looked very much older, his face lined with deep furrows, his hair grizzled and thinned, his expression clouded and careworn. Yet still he was Charles Dickens. His eyes were still bright, his dress was still loud and theatrical, and he continued to carry himself with almost military precision. The storm, like all storms, passed. Or rather, it hid itself in the heart of Dickens, and in those closest to him whose lives had been changed forever. He gave his wife a house and a carriage in Camden Town. Ellen Ternan and her sisters moved into a house beside Oxford Street. Whether he and Ellen were lovers, whether they were ever to become lovers, on that matter he and everyone else always remained silent.
There are those who say that it was a sexless intimacy, as between brother and sister, while others have pointed to rumours about their living together at a later date, and even to possible children. Nothing is known for certain. It's one of the great mysteries which Dickens created without pointing to any way through the labyrinth. The personality of Charles Dickens apparently is so transparent, so extrovert, so graspable, proves to be full of dark mysteries. Deeper than all, as Carlyle said of him. If one has eye to see deep enough, one sees dark, fateful, silent elements, tragical to look upon, hiding amid dazzling radiance as of the sun, the elements of death itself. But after all the uproar and scandal over the separation, when Dickens was at his very lowest, he did an astonishing thing. He decided to embark on a reading tour of the entire country. He wanted to find his audience again. He wanted to reach the people he feared he might have lost. He knew his power over them all, but now he wanted to exert it in person. His very first reading was of A Christmas Carol in Edinburgh. He stage-managed it quite brilliantly. He wore a rose in his buttonhole. There was a maroon screen behind him, and he was encircled by gaslight. There must be no one behind me. I must see everyone's face, and they must see mine. Everyone must see my face. He poured himself a tumbler of water from a carafe while the applause subsided. And he stood in silence for a few moments, looking around at the audience, and it was reported that his wonderful eyes seemed to have the power of meeting those of every separate individual in the audience. Keep your eyes upon me. Look. Now my eyes are on you. I need to be connected to you, and you to me. Then I will be transformed. Then I will come alive. I am Quilp. I am Pecksniff. I am the Artful Dodger. I am Vincent Crummles. He had a different voice for each character. The orotund voice of Sergeant Buzzfuzz, responsibility. The cockney Jewish lisp of Fagin. Suppose that lad of his own fancy, to please his own taste, suppose he was to do all this. What then, my dear? The fat boy's whine. I wants to make your flesh creep. Wild applause, tears, cheers, wonderful happiness. It is such an unspeakable satisfaction to me to have left such an impression here in Edinburgh, in London, Dublin, Huddersfield, Wakefield, York, Harrogate, Scarborough, Hull, Leeds, Halifax, Sheffield, Manchester, all in 11 days. He walked from Durham to Sunderland, and then he walked from Sunderland to Newcastle, and then on to Scotland by the new train. Edinburgh, Dundee, Aberdeen, Perth, Glasgow again. Everywhere the theatres were sold out. Large crowds waited all day and sometimes all night for tickets. And they were not disappointed. They'd come to see the most famous man of the day and to hear their favourite author read his own words. But they got something more. This was theatre. This was acting. At last, Dickens was able to be the actor he had always wanted to be. His hands and body were always in motion, and his face changed so remarkably that he seemed to become the person he was dramatising. Gamp is my name. Gamp Marnite. She was a fat old woman, this Mrs. Gamp, with a husky voice and a moist eye which she had a remarkable power of turning up and only showing the white. Having very little neck, it cost her some trouble to look over herself, if one may say so, at those to whom she talked. She wore a very rusty black gown, rather the worse for snuff, and a shawl and a bonnet to correspond. The face of Mrs. Gamp, the nose in particular, was somewhat red and swollen, and it was difficult to enjoy her society without becoming conscious of a peculiar fragrance.
as if a passing fairy had hiccuped, and had previously been to a wine vault. That is why she went to a lying in or a laying out with equal relish. "Ah!" repeated Mrs. Gamp, for that was a safe sentiment in cases of mourning. "Oh, dear, when Gamp was summoned to his long home, and I seen him a-lying in Guy's Hospital with a penny piece on each eye, and his wooden leg under his left arm, I thought I should have fainted away. But I bore up. The blessing of a daughter was denied to me, which, if we had one, Gamp would certainly have drunk its little shoes right off its feet, as with our precious boy he did." Then Mrs. Gamp solaced herself with a pinch of snuff and stood looking at the sick man with her head inclined a little sideways, as a connoisseur might gaze upon a doubtful work of art. "Oh," she said, "he'll make a lovely corpse." "I'm working late tonight, Master Copperfield. I'm improving my legal knowledge. I'm going through Tidds's practice. Oh, what a writer Mr. Tidd is, Master Copperfield."
Well, I suppose you're quite a great lawyer now, then, Uriah.
"Me, Master Copperfield? Oh, no, I'm a very humble person. I'm well aware that I'm about the humblest person going, let the other be where he may. My mother's likewise a very humble person. We live in a humble abode, Master Copperfield. We have much to be thankful for. My father's former calling was humble. He was a sexton."
And, what is he now?
"He's a partaker of glory at present, Master Copperfield. Whoever would begin to be worried with letting lodgings that wasn't a lone woman with a living to get is a thing inconceivable to me, my dears. Excuse the familiarity. It becomes natural when wishing to open my mind to those I can trust, and I should be truly thankful if that was all mankind, but such is not so. For have but a room to let sign in your window, and you watch on the mantelpiece and farewell to it if you turn your back for a second, however gentlemanly the manners, nor is being of your own sex any safeguard, as I have reason, in the form of sugar tongs, to know. For that lady, and a fine woman she was, got me to run for a glass of water on the plea of going to be confined, which certainly turned out to be true, but it was the police station. I'm a market cheapjack. You don't know what that is, do you? No, you don't. I'll show you. Here I am on the footboard of my cart in the marketplace on a Saturday night. I put up a general miscellaneous lot. I says, "Now, my free and independent voters, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with you. I'm going to give you such a chance as you never had in all your born days, nor yet the days preceding. Now, I'll show you what I'm going to do with you. Here's a pair of razors that will shave you closer than the Board of Guardians. Here's a flat iron worth its weight in gold. Here's a frying pan artificially flavoured with essence of beef steaks to that degree that you've only got for the rest of your lives to fry bread and drip it in it, and there you are, replete with animal food. And here's a dozen dinner plates that you may play the cymbals with to charm the baby when it's fractious. Stop! I'll throw you in another article and I'll give you that, and that's a rolling pin. And if the baby can only get it well into its mouth when its teeth is coming through and rub the gums once with it, they'll come through double in a fit of laughter equal to being tickled. Stop again! I'll throw you in another article because I don't like the looks of you. For you don't have the appearance of bias. And that article's a looking glass in which you may see how ugly you look when you don't bid. Now, what you say now, eh? Hey, what you say? What'd you say? Do you say a pound? No, you don't, not you. You haven't got it. Do you say 10 shillings? Not you. You owe more to the landlord. Well, then I'll tell you what I'll do with you. I'll heap them all up on the footboard of the cart. There they are. Razors, flat iron, frying pan, dinner plates, rolling pin and looking glass. Take them all away for 4 shillings and I'll give you 6 for your trouble. Now, do you know what I am? I'm a cheap jack.
Dickens was always exhausted after each performance. He went backstage and took off his clothes, which were wet with sweat. He'd have a glass of brandy and water, or perhaps a sip of iced champagne, and then they were off again. In Liverpool, 3,000 people were turned away from his reading. In Glasgow, 2 files of policemen kept the crowds from the doors of the City Hall. Yet even as he toured the country, he was writing his next novel, The Tale of Two Cities. And even as he was doing the readings and writing the novel, he was editing a new weekly periodical called All the Year Round. He was buoyed up, you see.
by the celebration which greeted him everywhere. It gave him the energy and purpose of his life. It gave him the will to carry on, to ride on over all obstacles and win the race. He felt that he'd faced down his past, you see. He marked his break with that past in an even more direct way. He burned all his letters in the garden of his house at Gad's Hill. This was the house, by the way, that his father had shown him as a child in Rochester, telling him that if he worked hard enough, he might one day own it. Well, now he did. The letters he was burning in that garden were from Thackeray, from Carlyle, from Tennyson, George Eliot, from Wilkie Collins, all consumed in the funeral pyre of his past. "Whatever you do, dear friend," he wrote to someone at the time, "don't look back." So what did Dickens do? He wrote Great Expectations, in which he entirely rewrites his own past. Never has a novel been so filled with the horrors of childhood. "As I draw closer and closer to the end," he said, "I travel in the circle nearer and nearer to the beginning." But after Great Expectations, he was planning another reading tour. But before beginning it, he went on a short holiday to visit Ellen Turner in the little retreat he'd rented for her and her mother in France, near Boulogne. He was now constantly travelling on the ferry between the two countries. On this occasion, they came back and took the 2:38 tidal train from Folkestone to London, but there was something wrong with the track. Some rails had been taken off from a viaduct and set aside for repair work, just at the time when the train was approaching them at a speed of 50 miles per hour. The train jumped the gap of 42 feet, and more than half of its carriages fell across a viaduct into the bed of the river below. The carriage in which Dickens and the Turners were travelling hung over the viaduct at an angle. The women screamed, but Dickens calmed them down, got them free, put them in a horse carriage, away from prying eyes. Then he saw two guards running up and down. "Look at me," he said to the men, "and tell me if you don't recognise me." "We know you very well, Mr. Dickens," they replied. Whereupon Dickens immediately began to organise the mission for help. He filled his top hat with water and started working among the dead and the dying. It was at this point that he suddenly remembered he had left that month's manuscript of Our Mutual Friend in the swaying carriage, so he climbed right back inside again and retrieved it. And despite that heroic episode, or perhaps because of it, his self-possession was never again complete. He became ill and fearful and travelling upon trains. He was plagued with sudden, vague rushes of terror. But who could stop him? He was himself very much like the locomotive, speeding towards its crash. Dickens could no more stop himself than he could stop breathing. He had to go on. He was now quite lame and suffering attacks upon his side and upon his heart. Nonetheless, he undertook the second reading tour of Britain. It was a triumph, but it completely exhausted him. All the more astonishing, then, that he should decide immediately afterwards to embark on a reading tour of the United States of America, though he was obliged to travel everywhere by the one form of transport he now most dreaded, the train. Again, it was a triumph, perhaps the single greatest triumph of his entire career. But this time, it really shattered him. On his return to England, he found that he could no longer work at his old pace. His elasticity of bearing was somewhat impaired, his friend Forster wrote, and the wonderful brightness of eye was dimmed at times. Curiously enough, he could only read the top half of the letters over shop doors. Nonetheless, he continued to add new readings to his repertory. One afternoon, in the summer of 1868, his son heard a violent quarrel in the field outside the country house. Two people were engaged in a serious and terrible uproar. He stepped outside anxiously, only to see his father striding up and down, gesticulating wildly in the characters of Bill Sikes and Nancy, with every circumstance of the most aggravated brutality.
the Sun reported. Dickens was preparing his next set of public readings. His friends begged him not to perform the terrible scene of Nancy's death. The realism he brought to it terrified his audience and shattered him physically and emotionally, but he was quite adamant it must be included. He hardly knew why he felt compelled to enter into the heart of darkness. He simply knew he had to. Did he have his wife somewhere in mind? Or was it all women who had so obsessed him throughout his life? Even, perhaps, Ellen Turner. But then he also took on the voice of Nancy, screaming and pleading with Bill up to the very point of her death. He was murderer and victim, man and woman. She staggered and fell, nearly blinded with the blood that rained down from a gash in her forehead, but raising herself on her knees, she drew from her bosom a white handkerchief, and holding it up towards heaven, breathed one prayer for mercy to her Maker. The murderer staggered backwards towards the wall, and shutting out the sight with his hand, seized a heavy club and struck her down. The bright sun burst upon the crowded city in clear and radiant glory, through costly coloured glass and paper-mended window. It shed its equal ray. It lighted up the room where the murdered woman lay. It did. He tried to shut it out, but it would stream in. If the sight had been a ghastly one in the dull morning, what was it now in all that brilliant light? He had not moved. He had been afraid to stir. Then there was a moan and a motion of her hand, and with terror added to rage, he had struck her again and again and again and again and again and again and again. There was the body, mere flesh and blood, no more, but such flesh and so much blood, the stains were dispersed about the room. The very feet of his dog were bloody. All this time, he had never once turned his back upon the corpse. He now moved backward toward the door, dragging the dog with him. Shut the door softly, locked it, took the key, and left the house. After completing that second reading tour, Dickens rested all that summer of 1869. Of course, he didn't rest. He started writing his next novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, a novel of murder and opium addiction and double identity. One day, his eldest son, Charles, came into the room where his father was writing. "If you don't want anything more, sir, I shall be off now." No answer. Silence. He raised his head and looked at me long and fixedly. But I soon found that although his eyes were bent upon me, and he seemed to be looking at me earnestly, he did not see me. And he was, in fact, unconscious for the moment of my very existence. He was in dreamland with Edwin Drood, and I left him. Despite his physical and mental exhaustion over the years, his work had lost nothing of its unique, inventive expansiveness. A late novel like Our Mutual Friend, where the comic and the sublime wander through the echo chamber of London, brims over with hilarity.
Mr. and Mrs. Podsnap requested the honour of the company of 17 friends at dinner to celebrate the 18th birthday of their little Georgiana. Hideous solidity was the characteristic of the Podsnap plate. Everything was made to look as heavy as it could and to take up as much room as possible. The majority of the guests were like the plate, and included several very heavy articles weighing ever so much. A foreign gentleman was among them, and there was a droll disposition, not only on the part of Mr. Podsnap, but of everybody else, to treat him as if he were a child who was hard of hearing. "How do you like London?" asked Mr. Podsnap. "London, Londra, London." The foreign gentleman admired it. "You find it very large?" said Mr. Podsnap, spaciously. The foreign gentleman found it very large. "And very rich?" The foreign gentleman found it without doubt énormément riche. Enormously rich, we say. "Enormously rich," attempted the foreign gentleman. "And do you find, sir, many evidences that strike you of our British Constitution in the streets of the world's metropolis? London, Londra, London. We Englishmen are very proud of our Constitution, sir. It was bestowed upon us by Providence. No other country is so favoured as this country." "And other countries?" "Other. In England, Angleterre, England, we do not say there. We say other. The letters are T and H. The sound is the. The. And the countries?" asked the foreign gentleman. "This island was blessed, sir, to the direct exclusion of such other countries as there may happen to be. There is in an Englishman a combination of qualities, modesty, an independence, a responsibility, a repose, combined with an absence of everything calculated to call a blush into the cheek of a young person, which one would seek in vain among the nations of the earth." Having delivered this little summary, with his favourite right-arm flourish, Mr. Podsnap put the rest of Europe, as well as the whole of Asia, Africa, and America, nowhere. In January of 1870, despite desperately poor health, Dickens embarked on a new season of readings, after every one of which he was so exhausted that he had to be carried backstage and laid on a sofa. He could not speak coherently for 10 minutes afterwards. Even during these readings themselves, he sometimes found it hard to pronounce the words accurately. Pickwick became Pickswick, Picnic, Peckwicks, and he continued to play the scene of the murder of Nancy. He might just as well have wielded the club against himself, since these final, agonized public performances to all intents and purposes killed him. He was now utterly dazed and worn. He ate little. He could not sleep. His left foot swelled. He was close to a paralytic stroke. His family doctor came to see him and instantly ordered him to stop. He was killing himself. Finally, even Dickens himself realized that he could no longer continue. The very last performance of all, at the St. James's Hall in London, he read A Christmas Carol and the trial scene from Pickwick. The applause at the end was overwhelming. Holding up his hand to silence it, Dickens said, "From the earliest years of my career down to this proud night, I have always tried to be true to my calling. I hope that the public believe that with a host of imperfections and shortcomings upon my head, I have, as a writer, in my soul and conscience, tried to be as true to them as they have ever been to me.
these garish lights, I vanish now forevermore, with a heartfelt, grateful, respectful, and affectionate farewell. He returned to the country, to Gad's Hill, where he continued working on Edwin Drood. On Wednesday, the 8th of June, contrary to his usual custom, he wrote all day. He came down to dinner, and Georgina Hogarth noticed an alteration in his colour and his expression. She asked him if he were ill, and he replied, "Yes, very ill. I've been very ill for the last hour." He said that he wanted to go to London immediately, but then he experienced a fit, against which he tried to struggle. He stopped and then started talking rapidly and indistinctly. The family got up from their chairs, and Georgina told him to come and lie down. "Yes," he said, "upon the ground." Those were the last words he uttered. He slipped from her arms and fell heavily to the floor. Upon the ground. Perhaps even in his extremity he was recalling the words of one of his characters, Louisa Gradgrind in Hard Times. "I shall die if you hold me. Let me fall upon the ground." He was imitating, literally becoming, his characters, until the very end. He lingered all that day. At 5 minutes before 6 in the evening, his breathing suddenly diminished and he began to sob. He sobbed for 15 minutes, heaved a deep sigh. A tear rose to his right eye and trickled down his cheek. And he was dead. 58 years old. At the funeral service in Westminster Abbey, he was buried next to Samuel Johnson and near the busts of Handel, Milton, Chaucer, and Shakespeare. The oration perfectly caught the mood of the country. He whose loss we now mourn occupied during his lifetime a greater space in the minds of Englishmen than any other writer. We read him, we talked about him, we acted him, we laughed with him. We were roused by him to a consciousness of the misery of others and to a sympathetic interest in human life. Men seem to have lost not a great writer only, but one whom they had personally known. And so we bid him farewell. And in the midst of all this stood Mr. Pickwick. Let us leave our old friend in one of those moments of unmixed happiness of which, if we seek them, there are ever some to cheer our transitory existence here. There are dark shadows on the earth, but its lights are stronger in the contrast. Some men, like bats or owls, have better eyes for the darkness than for the light. We who have no such optical powers are better pleased to take our last parting look at our visionary companions. And the brief sunshine of this world is blazing full upon them.
That was Simon Callow, performing in the one-man play The Mystery of Charles Dickens. The script was written by Peter Ackroyd, it was produced by Stephen Wright, and directed by Gemma McMullen.